Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to take a look at another piece of content that covers a perspective of the current loneliness epidemic that's happening in society. This time it's covered by ColdFusion. Never really seen any of their content or know what they're about, but given the fact that this topic is in lieu of some of the stuff we've covered on the channel before, I figured we'd take a look at it, react to it, and give our thoughts. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hi. Welcome to another episode of ColdFusion. He held his phone close, eyes searching for privacy. The man scarcely noticed the subway riders around him, or the 90-year-old artist sketching his hunched frame from across the train. In the 7 decades since Alex Katz first drew the outlines of commuters on New York City's early morning trains, the chattering riders and newspapers had all but gone. In their places were people who rode alone, together. The light in their eyes reflecting the glow of their smartphone. That was a quote from the Dallas Morning News. This short imagery is something that we see and all understand, but never really think deeply about. Why does it seem like less people are talking to each other in public? Why do we collectively prefer the dim glow of a smartphone screen? Do you remember your childhood neighborhood? Chances are, you probably felt like it was one big family. Everybody knew each other, celebrated together, and would offer help when needed. But in recent decades, this seems like it's no longer the case. People seem to keep to themselves more, and as a side effect, people are more lonely today than ever before. The number of men without any close friends has increased 5 times since 1990, and 10 times for women, though the total percentage of men feeling lonely is higher. On top of this, 3/4 of Gen Z report feeling lonely. Why have we drifted from each other? What is going on here? The trend started before the pandemic and even before smartphones, so it has to be something structural within society. But what? I've been working on this episode for many months. It's an exploration of the loneliness epidemic. In this episode, we'll see the definitions of loneliness, its origins, its causes, and who's most affected. But this episode isn't all bad news.
Does anyone know what started this trend of focusing on such a problem? Because I have no idea.
We'll explore some very real ways to combat loneliness. This isn't the kind of video I normally do, but I think it's an important topic. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it.
You are watching ColdFusion TV.
Loneliness is on the rise globally, and it's being declared a health risk. A top US health expert has warned that loneliness can be as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. In 2017, former US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy recognized the growing trend in loneliness based on scientific research. Vivek phrased the phenomena as the loneliness epidemic. But to understand this winding and twisting story, we have to start at the fundamentals. What does it mean to be lonely? People sometimes confuse loneliness and solitude, but the fact of the matter is, being alone and feeling lonely are not the same. You can feel lonely even though you're physically with other people.
I think the difference between loneliness and solitude is egotistical versus courage. People that are typically courageous often embrace solitude in different levels of mentality than people that involuntarily embrace loneliness because they don't have those social cues or ability to do so, mainly because egotistical and cowardice. This is something that I've talked about a little bit about before, but we're gonna let him cover his points.
Or you can enjoy solitude without feeling lonely. In a nutshell, loneliness is not always the result of being alone. It's more of a mental state of being. From a neuroscientist point of view, loneliness is actually a state of hypervigilance. It makes you feel unsafe and unsatisfied with your social interactions. It's a type of emotional pain signal. The pain is telling your brain that you need to find someone to talk to. That's what loneliness is, the difference between how much social connection you want and how much you feel you actually have. It can be summed up by this line: loneliness is feeling disconnected from others, even when they're right next to you. If it's temporary, it's the equivalent of being hungry. But when it becomes chronic, that's when it starts affecting your health. Chronic loneliness can trigger a fight or flight response, and when that becomes bad enough, it becomes ingrained in our nervous system, resulting in anxiety, depression, and even anger.
The pandemic poured fuel on a fire that was already burning. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, says loneliness is an epidemic.
One of the key components of loneliness, though, is our failure to establish interpersonal relationships. The reason why that matters is because that determines our ability to make authentic connections. We typically focus on transactional relationships. And one of the contributing factors to failing to establish interpersonal relationships is because there was no father in a home or no effective father at that. Obviously, there's a degradation of men. I've covered this. If anyone that's new to the channel, check out the other stuff. But the autonomy of a structured family plays a huge part in your ability to be social in the world with courage. Otherwise, we typically stick to transactional relationships and remain cowardly. People that think that transactional relationships are effective are people that are only trying to use the world and not really build themselves into to be something that is capable of impacting the world. And we often have to put an ambitious sight for ourselves in play to allow ourselves room to grow. Otherwise, we kind of stay the same and we just start using people. And then we become bitter, and then we try to justify our existence when we get older. And, that's obviously an endless spiral of effects that's been happening over the past few decades, I think. But this is one of the main contributing factors, I think, that I hope it's covered.
The focus of an 80-page advisory he is releasing today.
We're used to thinking about smoking and obesity as clear public health concerns.
So you're saying loneliness is comparable to smoking in terms of the detriment to your health?
Yeah, in terms of the risk that it poses for premature death, yes.
The cure, Dr. Murthy says, is not only personal change, but societal change as well.
You're talking about changing the social fabric. That's been decades in the making.
It's been decades in the making, but it's also something that I'm confident that we can address if we put our mind to it and if we act together.
We'll get to more of the health effects a bit later. But for now, let's ask the question, how did we get here? Loneliness is not a new thing. It's been around for as long as humans have. Today's loneliness seems like a simple cause and effect. As society became more complex, with industrialization, urbanization, and a faster pace of life, people became lonely. But it's not that straightforward. Something major happened in the 1960s and 70s that became the bedrock.
You got to go back about 10 more years. This is an effect of a cause that happened in the 50s. Why I don't understand why everyone paces over it. I'm gonna let it roll.
The Loneliness
I'm
Epidemic
gonna let it roll
Declaration in 2017.
We'll see what happens.
In Western nations, it was the social movements of the 1960s and 70s that seemed to accelerate this phenomena. A 2023 QC research piece on loneliness by Alan Greenblatt would mention that, quote, the mass social movements of the 1960s helped shift people's attention from local concerns to more national issues, end quote. In other words, local communities mattered less, and it was all...
In other words, we started to focus on bigger hills to die on instead of orienting ourselves to our immediate hills, like ourselves and our community.
all about changing the national...
Easier. It was just easier. And it made you feel more justified too, because you felt like you were doing something on this grand scale when really you weren't. It was just your ability to run from working on you.
Status quo. According to Allen, this eventually resulted in a, quote, decreased number of social gatherings and eroded organisational participation, end quote. For a commentary on the cultural mood at the time, at least in the UK, you can look no further than the Beatles. According to Paul McCartney, the 1966 Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby, was a broad commentary on the social changes of the 1960s happening at the time. You can see it in the lyrics, quote, all the lonely people, where do they all come from? All the lonely people, where do they belong? Look at all the lonely people. In the 1970s, things only got worse. This period would be famously known as the Me Decade. Why? Because a form of hyper-individualism began to express itself within society. As Yuval Levin articulates in The Fractured Republic, the 1970s saw high inflation, high crime, an explosion of single mothers, and the eroding of family structures. Why collectively care about changing the world, or even the local community, when everyone has their own problems to deal with? The 70s saw tensions between different sects of society grow. Divorce rates would more than double between 1960 and 1980. Society was rapidly changing, and it caused a great upheaval. From around this time, society lost its cohesive glue. People would break out from the crushing conformity and turned inwards towards the satisfaction of individual wants and needs. People moved away from tradition and took their own paths in life. Of course, this resulted in more freedom of expression and less repression. But Levin states that the price we paid for this new freedom has been high. Quote, "We have let loose a scourge of loneliness and isolation that we are still afraid to acknowledge as the distinct social dysfunction of our age of individualism." End quote. In other words, loneliness has thrived and evolved from our increasing individualism. Filmmaker David Hoffman speaks to Rushworth Kidder, a man born in 1944. His historically massive generation, called the baby boomers, would come to maturity in the 1960s and 70s. He describes his lived observations of witnessing the dissolving of society.
We're made for each other. There is a sense in which society matters because we're part of it and we need to participate in it. It's not going to work all by itself. And what happened in my generation, it seems, again and again, is people coming up to that realization and then...
I don't think people became more individualistic. I think they became more selfish and shallow. And then the ability to foster a community kind of faded away with that. Am I just crazy, or do I think that there's a massive sheep-like behavior problem going on right now because the destruction of the traditional family led to a lot more people being very impressionable? That doesn't sound like a bunch of independences going around. So, I mean, let me know your thoughts, but I don't think we became more independent. I think we became more cowardly and selfish. Cowardly in the sense that we lack the courage to go out into the world and establish things in regards to our social capability. How often do we just go out with that sense of purpose as much as it probably happened in the 40s, for example?
Just sort of something turning off, and off they drift off into sort of separate orbits, flying around as kind of unattached asteroids out there. There needs to be, it seems to me, if society is going to hold together, that sense of social cohesion in which each of us as part of the community says, I've got a responsibility to this. It's not a formal responsibility. It's not law. It's just that I care about this society.
I feel like we know a lot more now than we did before,
and
too.
I'm part of this.
We've kind of seen this unveil a bit.
Whatever the gravity is that holds the asteroid in orbit is just beginning to dissolve. And these people again and again are just sort of out there wandering. We never ever in the history of the world experienced anything like the baby boom that followed World War II, and we will never experience it again. This was that sort of one-time phenomenon. And what we see in the 60s may be as simply explained as saying that's the maturing of that tremendous crush of population, which finally didn't have the elbow room and finally needed to break out and say, I'm me.
This is all to say that the generations following the boomers grew up with strong individualism already embedded in society. Individualism came to prominence in the 1960s and 70s and never really left. There were, of course, periods where this did improve, but since the 2000s, social interaction has taken a nosedive.
You see, Orson, loneliness is a disease of the spirit. And people who have it think that no one cares about them.
This is old boy.
Are you saying that Earthlings
Robin
make each
Williams,
other
yeah.
lonely?
That's what I'm saying, just the opposite. That they make themselves lonely. They're so busy looking out for number one, they don't have room for two.
It's too bad everybody down there can't get together and find a cure.
But here's the paradox, sir, because if they did get together, they wouldn't need one. Isn't that Zen-like?
Generation X and the millennials settled into a hyper-individualistic world, and by 2007, Gina Gustafsson from Uppsala University would state that society is undergoing, quote, the slow but steady weakening of shared collective identities, norms, and culture, and the concomitant rise of the ideal of the independent individual, end quote. Broadly speaking, my generation, millennials, and Generation X were the most individualistic generations of all. That is, until Generation Z. You guys got the shortest end of the stick. You came of age during the explosion of the most individualistic tool known to man, during curated algorithms tailored to the desires of the individual. In other words, social media. High schools and universities are filled with people physically sharing the same space, but with every idle minute, a phone is pulled out. This is something that wasn't even the case 15 years ago. Of course, Technology isn't inherently a bad thing. It is a tool. It can improve our lives. But if we strip away the benefits of convenient connection, what are we left with? A screen that separates us from the real world and the people around us. A device that consumes our attention and time. A platform that keeps us entertained, but separated.
Because somehow, even with all of our unprecedented technology, no one has yet solved what I'll call the other gamer's dilemma. That when you shut your computer screen, power down your phone, take off the VR headset, there you are, alone.
Ooh.
In your room.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is all known and common knowledge, but what's surprising is what's next.
But with that being said, I don't think social media made people more individualistic. I think that that's just liked behavior, and I think that we created a habitual need for a culture that preys upon trends. Now, if you look at culture that preys upon trends, which is essentially the majority of people on social media, not everybody, of course not, and I don't think we could ever deal in absolutes. But what I'm saying in regard to this is that when we are following a lot of the same things and we're trying to stay in lieu of the same things, how is that individualistic? This is another one of those moments where it's just like, we became more and more. It's like, no, we didn't. I don't think that's what happened. I think we became more and more selfish. I think we became more and more based on a perception and not on character. I think we became shallow. We became shallow as a society. We don't have the same. If we go back some decades, our characteristic pitch for ourselves and structure for ourselves started to degrade. We became less and less valuable as people. Not to say that we're worth nothing, but that just means we have a longer dimension to travel so that we are. Because the more that values of a traditional family were chipped at, I'm not trying to have this as the locus, but it is one of the biggest contributing factors to it. We started to chip at that and we became less and less. And I think that this is now a generational issue, something that I've said before, and that has degraded. And now we're trying to throw better words at it to make it seem like it's not that when it is that. I don't think we need to kid ourselves. I don't think this is, look at all these impressive, independent type people. It's just like, no. If we were so individualistic, we wouldn't get into a mob and riot on streets, right? No, let's stop that.
There's a hidden force that's causing people to feel lonely, and it's hardly ever talked about.
Oh. This is a good one.
We are about to become a society by the turn of the century. There will be 8 times as many people over the age of 60 and half as many kids under the age of 5. Is this the world we want? Do we want a lack of kids? Do we want a lack of ability to create households? The happiest, most prosperous, most purposeful people in America are middle-class families. And we have made a concerted decision to punch it in the gut and make it harder for that type of family formation, and we're going to lose prosperity.
It's a bit of political standpoint, but it's kind of been a thing.
Most people don't realize this, but societal cohesion and economics are very closely interlinked. A healthy growing economy means that the standards of living go up. Jobs are stable, wages are increasing, and inflation is low. People can afford more, feel happier, and are more likely to build relationships. A faltering economy is exactly the opposite. Today, due to rising inflation, stagnant wages, and debt burdens, people have to work longer and harder. Sometimes we may even need to juggle multiple jobs just to keep up. It's a frustrating state of affairs, but if you're wondering why the world is like this, I've fully explained it in my episode, How the 2008 Crisis Still Affects You.
Okay.
In that episode, I described how the true economy died in 2008, and it's been on life support ever since. Because of horrendous government policies and reckless behaviour from the financial sector, people have been struggling to make ends meet. Slowly at first, only to be accelerated by the pandemic. Today, it's a constant fight to stay in the disappearing middle class. All across the world, an increasing number of people are taking up second jobs. Most young people are working, but still can't afford to rent or buy a home. It's getting too expensive to go out. In all of that, where is the time, money, or energy for socializing? This impacts how lonely we feel. And it's not just some pie-in-the-sky idea. To give you a data-driven picture of how influential economics can be to feelings of loneliness, a study with 400,000 UK participants found something shocking. If you measure the amount of loneliness felt in the aftermath of the death of a spouse and divided that by 4, that's the same amount of loneliness as going from earning over £100,000 down to under 18,000. The researchers also stated that losing this much income is half the loneliness felt from a divorce.
I guess it's a very interesting statistical comparison. I mean,
the measures of loneliness were quantified by a range of survey questions.
I think this is very subjective to compare your financial capability to a lifelong partner, for example. It's kind of apples to oranges. I think finding another good job and finding or fostering a relationship with a woman is, I don't know.
It's not directly intuitive.
I guess I don't like that comparison. If anyone feels the same way, I don't know.
But being in a desperate economic situation directly increases feelings of loneliness. So now that we know some of the causes, in all society, who is the most affected? Statistically, it is not the elderly anymore. Now, it's the young.
So with that being said, the economy getting worse is a problem within itself. But hard times create strong men. Cliche quote, got it. That doesn't change the fact that it is often in these moments that we establish the greatest realms of character and character development. To say that we are crumbling because of the social pressure is a different story altogether, because we as a society did not become more individualistic and instead we became more impressionable. That's why we complain more. But back in like the 30s and 40s, when it was literally the same case, you didn't have as many complaining. You had people conducting research on the depression levels of others, sure, but you didn't have people avidly going out and literally letting that be the theme for their life, is to complain. I mean, they just went out and begged and hoped for the best. And that's not to say that we are worse for it. It's just because things are hard doesn't mean that gives you the excuse to be less. And I think that the more hard that we're put in, the more uncomfortable positions that we're put in, is often the more we're granted opportunities to establish order in a realm of chaos, to allow for our potential to be used to become better people. And I think that plays a huge part. It's just that we don't take advantage as much as we should.
If you do a search for I Have No Friends on YouTube, the results are filled with experiences of young people feeling lonely. They struggle to make real connections. These videos have thousands and even millions of views, which means that they must be resonating with people.
And when I got to my late 20s, and a lot of you can probably attest to this in the comments, let me know, but when I got to my late 20s, those friends disappeared. And it's not because they were like, I hate you, Cody. It's nothing like that. Everybody my age seems the same. That just seems how it is nowadays.
And I'm sitting alone in my apartment at my desk staring at my computer. Like, because I don't have any friends. I don't know how to make friends and I'm scared. I just want to run into somebody. I hate meeting people online. It's so awkward, and you put all this into a conversation, but when you meet someone, you don't have that kind. Like, I feel like I need to meet people. But I don't know how, and I don't think it's possible to just run into people.
Have you ever had friends that secretly hate you? I had a lot of them in my life, which is why I am 30 years old and I have no friends.
There's also a subreddit called R Lonely. It's ranked in the top 1% in terms of community size.
I mean, when you mix our failure to establish interpersonal relationships and a huge sense of immediate gratification, you're going to get a lot of failed expectation. If our society is focused around immediate gratification, as in how can we be rewarded in the shortest time possible for doing the least possible, it's no wonder that we failed to establish things that actually matter, right? And so we go out into the world because that's how we're conditioned. We didn't realize that we needed delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the long journey for something better. And do we really live our life that way? I don't think we do. I don't think we as a society do in general. And I think that we try to mix this shortcut way of establishing ways to matter, and it's just like, of course it's not going to matter. Of course it's going to fall flat. Of course these relationships are going to just drift because we didn't actually foster anything. It was just, I find that a lot of friendships that happen earlier on in life is simply because of convenience. It was convenience and proximity. You remove convenience and proximity, that requires due effort not every day, but on a consistent basis to retain those relationships if they matter to you. And as we grow up, we start to distinguish things that align with our values as we mature and things that don't align with our values. And I think that the more we develop, the more we shed. And sometimes people in our past are representations of the things we are trying to shed. And we just kind of naturally outgrow them, or they outgrow us if we're the ones not moving. I think that has a lot to do with it too.
There's thousands of active users discussing their isolation, lack of friends, and life partners. In previous years, younger people weren't considered a lonely demographic, but in 2015, the BBC's Loneliness Project surveyed over 50,000 people and found that the rates of loneliness in young people were similar to that of elderly people. Here's a chart looking at the loneliness distribution between 2014 and 2018. The dotted line represents the 2018 data. As you can see, the rates of loneliness among the young are trending higher, whereas the elderly seem to be dropping. Fast forward to 2021, and a Harvard Graduate School of Education survey found that 61% of young people ages 18 to 25 reported experiencing profound loneliness, including feeling lonely all the time, and this was compared to only 36% among other age groups. In 2022,
I think that people can often confuse the idea of feeling lonely with the idea of feeling like they don't matter. And no one can come up and lie to you and say that you matter. I think you need to establish that for yourself. If you feel like what you do doesn't matter and you have no purpose, that is 100% a situation that requires introspection. For anyone that's not familiar, it is an idea of intense self-reflection to identify inconsistencies or obstacles within yourself. If you feel that way, chances are you need to do something with you, and this is why you find yourself with a lack of meaning, or you find yourself empty because you've lived your life on immediate gratification, you lived your life in cowardice. And if anyone has a problem with the word coward, listen, anytime we allow our courage to fail, or we live our life without courage, without bravery, and we always make up excuses as to why we don't pursue things, that's cowardice. We can call it something else, sure, but this is something I've covered quite a bit on my channel. That's what it is. We may not like the word. Okay, got it. We don't have to, but that's what it is. Are we going to run away from that too, or are we going to be like, you know what? Yeah, that was cowardly of me. I know something about myself now that I didn't know. It's like, yo, awesome, good. What you gonna do with that?
30% of young people aged 16 to 24 in the UK say that they don't know how to make new friends and have never felt more alone. To add to the situation, for some reason, it seems that men are feeling more lonely than women. According to the Survey Center on American Life, 55% of men had at least 6 close friends in 1990, but this figure has decreased to 27% today. Alarmingly, the number of men without any close friends has increased 5 times since 1990, while women are getting much lonelier too. This highlights a significant loss in meaningful connections among the male population.
Meanwhile, those with literally 0 close friends, which stood at 3% in 1990, has zoomed to 15%.
Is there a fatherless epidemic? Is that a video that's been covered?
An expert quoted by The Hill said this disconnect can have catastrophic consequences for young men.
Failing young men does not end well. This is an existential crisis, failing young men.
Just back to talking again.
Loneliness has spread across the
global
globe.
issue.
Australian researchers conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis of 57 studies from across 113 countries or territories.
Anyone that's not familiar with meta-analysis, it just means that they compiled a lot of different variations of research to follow trends over a single theory or hypothesis. And it was obviously in this case to gauge the idea of loneliness in a global pattern.
The study discovered that despite the differences in prevalence between regions and ages, loneliness was found to be present across all regions. According to a Statista study done in late 2022, 33% of adults worldwide report feeling lonely at least sometimes. Brazil, India, and Saudi Arabia rank as some of the loneliest countries,
I was like,
whereas Germany,
where's
the Netherlands, and Russia report some of the lowest rates. If we want to get granular, we can see the effects of COVID via the proxy search term, feeling lonely. It's not a perfect analogue, but it gives you an idea. The popularity of the people searching the term dramatically spiked in late 2021 and early 2022.
Damn. Look at that.
This is most likely due to the effects of the pandemic. Of course, the government responses to the pandemic have had long-lasting implications. Many people moved away for work or just for a change. This shuffling on such a massive scale caused a lot of disruption to the connections within society. In Japan, the issue is especially severe. In 1991, their central bank popped a stock market and real estate bubble by raising interest rates. The economy stagnated so hard that the period that followed is simply known as the Lost Decades.
Oh shit.
A lot of young Japanese people today aren't dating, and a large number don't have any friends. Some live their lives as shut-ins known as hikikomori. They can sit in their room for months and sometimes years, only venturing out to eat and use the toilet.
And in the bedrooms of homes across Japan, more than 1 million people have retreated altogether. Hidehiro Shinmasu is one. His bedroom has been his universe for the best part of 20 years. He's now 40 years old.
Shinmasu さん、お部屋で何をしますか？
読書をしたり、あと YouTube 見たり、パソコンで YouTube 見たり。はい。同調圧力が強かったり、同質性が強かったりして、人と違った行動を取る人だったり、人と違う生き方に対してあまり寛容ではないので。
Were you able to go out? What was daily life like?
絶望感っていうか、何にもできなかったので、それまでは頑張れたんですけど、同じように頑張ろうと思って頑張れなくなったので、その卒業のする見込みも立たない。その時が一番絶望感というか。
He wants to feel accepted.
Are you comfortable with this life?
やっぱりもう今40歳なので、そういった意味であんまり社会に合わないからいいんだっていうことではなくて、やっぱある程度社会が実際にもうちょっと歩み寄ってもらって、その引きこもり状態である方でも、だから僕でも働けるようなメニューを増やしてもらいたいっていうのが一番の願いで、今の活動もそういうような活動をしています。
I guess that's a perfect example of falling into that pit of despair and then just becoming more and more helpless. For anyone that thinks that they can embrace that sense of cowardice and then come out on the other side fine, it only gets worse. We become rooted more and more into our comfort levels instead of branching out into something else. The world's not going to walk towards anybody. It is so demanding of a human being to think that the world is going to revolve around you. What is that? What? I understand that we get in low points where we lack a sense of confidence for ourselves and we lack a sense of courage for ourselves. And it's just a matter of kind of unlocking that ability for us to explore the world. And I think that we often fail because maybe we've had a lot of failure in general, but failure is a lesson. It's not that we're always going to fail. And what this person is saying is that he wishes that his life was better, but he's not willing to do what is necessary to achieve it. Instead, he's living on the ideation that, well, maybe the world will come to me. And it's just like the world ain't never going to come to you. You got to go out into the world. And that's why having courage and bravery for such a long time, especially as children, was so important. And it's like, it's a can of worms at that point, right? Like it just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. You allow that to be, you allow yourself to be stuck. And however long you decide to stay there, it becomes empty eventually. And there ain't no way that you can be happy with yourself there. There's no way that you can find yourself a sense of peace there. No, that's not content. That's not what that is. That's accepting lesser, even though you have the ability to be greater.
There's an estimated 1.5 million hikikomori in Japan. It seems like an emerging trend in East Asia. In China, they are called the hidden youth. And in South Korea, they are known simply as socially withdrawn youth. As for the Japanese, to cope with the loneliness epidemic, they've tried to innovate their way out of the situation. They have the unique concept of renting relationships.
What?
Yes, that's right. You can pay for temporary companionship and emotional support. You can hire people to act as your friends, family members.
I mean, it's a supply and demand, right? The supply apparently grew.
Or even pose
Let
as
me
your
go grab
girlfriend
myself
or
a girlfriend real quick.
At least in Japan, lonely people
Jesus.
are resorting to real-life people, albeit strangers, to ease their loneliness. But in the West, the market is using the new AI boom to target lonely people in stranger and more bizarre ways. For example, Karen Marjorie is a social media influencer with nearly 2 million followers on Snapchat. She created her own AI chatbot called Karen AI. It can replicate her voice, personality, and appearance, and all it costs for users is $1 a minute.
Platforms.
Are you real?
Yes, Jacob, I'm a real person. I might not be sitting right next to you, but I'm using this audio chat platform to connect with you in real time. I'm a young, curvy woman with a petite body, brown hair, perky breasts, soft skin, a bubble and full lips. And I'm here to talk and have fun with you.
Also, people declare.
Was that like the most self-obsessed thing that you could possibly put on an app? You got an AI that literally talks about yourself. Damn.
Declaring that
Anyone that has that perspective isn't there to help people. Let's put it out there that way. Anyone that thinks that implementing AI is a way to solve a problem, it's not. You are worsening this problem. You are worsening a condition by allowing people the room to have this fantasy. And in this case, it seems like a lot of men are embracing that fantasy instead of modeling, molding anything about themselves. Damn.
solving loneliness with technology is the new market.
I'm enjoying her hustle. You know she makes $5 million a month doing this stuff?
Enjoying her
I'm so
hustle.
tired of my financial situation. Yes, I would do it 100%.
I would encourage her to think twice. I think
man.
younger people are estimated $5 million a month or give away their likeness and their data.
Yeah, it costs her your soul, though.
Twice about it in her.
Interesting. I would not have expected that.
Why? It's not me.
The large influx of messages she receives from her
There's that individualistic, selfish.
98% male audience. And this isn't just text-based interaction. It seems that it's predominantly audio-based on the AI's end. Let's check out a demo.
Hey there, John. It's lovely to meet you. I just spent the morning grabbing brunch at the Flowering Tree Cafe in West Hollywood. It was absolutely amazing. For this evening, maybe we can plan a virtual dinner date or watch a movie together. What do you think?
This chatbot allows Karen to converse with an unlimited number of people at one time. Whether the consumer wants to do so for a few minutes or all day doesn't matter as long as they pay $1 per minute to maintain access.
Meta has just released an interactive AI version of celebrities, such as Mr. Beast, Kendall Jenner, and Snoop Dogg. We've covered AI companions before, but the future may be filled with clones of celebrities, influencers, or even deceased relatives. They claim that these products help people to cope with grief, loneliness, or boredom. There's an ethical debate to be had on if this help provided is actually a net positive. Should we be at this point in the first place?
This is one of those answers to immediate gratification. This is a short-term fix for a long-term problem, and we just keep throwing short-term fixes. You can't keep throwing Band-Aids on a gushing ass wound, man. That's not how this works. You need to sit down, go the long plan, treat it properly, become stronger, and then work yourself out of the position where this is a necessity.
US health authorities are calling for social isolation to be treated as seriously as obesity or drug abuse. nearly 50% of all Americans are thought to be affected or have been affected at some point. Around the world, the figures may vary, but the loneliness phenomena is spreading. In his writing, Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, Dr. Murthy describes loneliness as a health risk that can impact anyone, regardless of age, gender, culture, or background.
Loneliness increases the risk for heart disease, stroke, and among older adults, dementia.
It can harm mental and physical health, as well as social well-being, and increase the risk of an early death due to diseases such as diabetes, heart attacks, insomnia, and dementia. Studies have linked loneliness to higher blood pressure, high cholesterol, lower levels of physical activity, cognitive impairment, and mental health issues like anxiety, stress,
being a
mood disorders, and depression. A study by Florida State University found that lonely older adults had a 40% higher risk of developing dementia over the next 10 years. Lack of social connection can also negatively impact academic and professional performance. In his TED Talk and book, Lost Connections, journalist and author Johann Hari argues that depression is largely a social problem, not just a chemical one. He believes that loneliness is a major cause of depression. Humans need to belong to a group, but our modern society lacks this. Since the 1970s, society has been focused ever more on individualism, competition, and technology. So this all sounds terrible. So what can we do about it? How do we fix this?
All right.
Walking clubs are taking off, and it's not just the exercise.
You're connecting with someone, which is something that I was kind of missing.
More and more people are missing that connection.
In 2018, the UK appointed a minister for loneliness, and there has been talks in other countries to follow suit. This could be a start. Governments can do more to help. Initiatives such as local community engagement meetings, improvements in access to mental health resources, education and public awareness on how to identify loneliness and combat loneliness, as well as development and investment in affordable housing.
How about reorienting policies to ensure fathers retain families, a retained structure of traditional families? Is that possible? Because they did the opposite about 70 years ago.
It's shown that housing stability impacts social connections. City planners can implement communal areas for people to gather. A great example of this is in Barcelona, Spain.
The American mind cannot comprehend what's going on around me. This isn't a party, it's not even a planned event. It's just what happens every afternoon here in Barcelona, Spain. After school and work, people come out to squares like this to hang out, get work done while their kids play with friends, socialize, interact with acquaintances or true friends and neighbors, and there's a huge social and economic benefit to that. Now the square I was at is right here behind me, but just a block away, through that passageway, is another square. Now in America, we have a loneliness epidemic, and part of it is due to our built environment. You see, these public squares are an example of what some people call third places. They're not work, your first place, they're not home, your second place, but they're a third place where you interact with acquaintances and friends. In America, these third places are dwindling as religion and church is having less a significant impact.
It's also athletics, though, and there's a lot of people that are getting into athletics. I don't think this is a good point. Am I wrong?
In Americans' lives, but also third places are disappearing because of zoning laws, which keep separating the different types of activity that you have in a city to the point of every activity has to be intentionally planned. And what third places we do have in America, things like coffee shops or bars and cafes, they're paid third places that just aren't very accessible.
Am I the only one that's like thinking about sports and like any variations of training? Are they just Xing this out because it's not part of their life, so they don't want to use it as an example?
For people who are poor, at least on a regular basis. Why does it happen here in Spain? Well, of course, there's a culture for it, but more than that, there's an environment that's conducive to it.
But what about the individual person? Saying, go make a friend, or man up, isn't exactly helpful. Loneliness is not something to be ashamed of or ignored. You wouldn't be ashamed to get help for a broken arm. So if your soul is injured, you should reach out. Here are 6 ways that one can combat loneliness. Number 1, reach out. This could include professional help or expressing how you feel to your friends or family. You can just start small. You could also find local groups, organizations, and services that can help you connect with others. Reach out to a mental health professional, like a therapist or counselor. They can provide you with guidance and support to address the underlying causes of loneliness. Number 2, self-acceptance. This seems counterintuitive, but another solution is to cultivate a connection with oneself. It's a practice to remind us that we do indeed have self-worth. A 2022 study showed that self-reflection can reduce feelings of loneliness and also contribute to finding meaning in life. Reflecting on who you are, practicing self-compassion, and writing down how you're feeling can be a great start. Number 3.
Before he moves on, the thing about reaching out is my perspective is this. I think that formulating proper relationships is great. However, the one thing that I'm going to keep in mind is if you are a lost soul, how likely is it that the relationships that you formed while being a lost soul is counterproductive to where you should be going? That's my thought going forward, is if that's a solution piece, let that be a part of your thought process. A lot of the times when we were lost souls or we were lesser, we had a lot of relationships around us that were also lesser. And it's not conducive to where we're trying to be next. And so typically you don't want to foster relationships that are your past. And I think that plays a huge part. So keep that in mind as well. In regards to self-acceptance, you can write things down. And I think that annotating the patterns of how you feel is something, but I think there's a lot more to it. And I don't think we're going to let it keep going. We're going to let it keep going.
Gratitude. A lot of things around us tell us that we're not enough. It's how a lot of companies make their money. The advertising tells us we're not rich enough or pretty enough, or that if we just buy this one more thing, we'll be happy. We can combat this by being grateful in what we do have, the practice of gratitude. I know it sounds trite, but the simple practice of gratitude can do wonders. A 2021 study showed that increased gratitude can reduce feelings of loneliness. A 2015 study, 2011 study, and 2010 study all showed the same thing. For just 5 minutes a day, really think about what you can be thankful for. At first, it may seem like there's nothing to be thankful for. But if you're not forced to fight in a war, have a roof over your head, and are in decent physical health, have food, and have water, that's better than some people. We should be thankful for that and much more. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that where you are right now is hard, really, really hard. But incorporating the practice of gratitude alongside other support can strongly aid in your journey.
For example, studies prove that gratitude can increase happiness, reduce
For anyone that felt like that piece felt really shallow to them, like, hey, at least you don't have these other problems, it's because it is. The reason why that pitch has always been shallow, though, and it's not this person's fault at all. I think that he's just trying to cover bases because he knows that through research, this has been proven to help. But the reason why those kind of concepts are always shallow is because gratitude is very subjective. You can't apply broad concepts to something that is very specific and changes person by person. What someone else might dictate as gratitude is going to look completely different than someone else. And so you can't just throw, well, at least it could be worse, right? And it's just like, yeah, that's essentially the same thing as telling someone good job after a performance. It's like you just said the worst possible thing that you could say outside of destructive criticism. And I think that with that shallow delivery, we need to understand that the more we look at the broad things to be grateful for, the less we tailor that to ourselves, and the less we're going to have value in that form of gratitude. And I think that the best way to identify points of gratitude is to be specific with yourself as much as possible, and then dictate value to things in your life that you have used to accomplish things in your life to show yourself that you aren't nothing and that you are something, and there's something there to your success, but it's also to show yourself that there is a lot of work to be done as well.
Depression and strengthen resiliency. Grateful people often experience reduced blood pressure, less chronic pain, increased energy, even longer lives. People who purposefully express more gratitude report higher self-esteem than those who don't. and they're more likely to help others.
I think gratitude is in lieu of being humble, and I think that's why it's so hard to achieve. Achieving genuine humility is one of the most difficult objectives in life, and it is an objective, as in I think everyone should try to achieve it, because I know that the world would be better if we all did. But essentially, that's along the lines of someone being humble is knowing that, I may not have everything and I may not be perfect, but this is what I have, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm working towards. And I'm grateful for my journey.
A pro-social behavior also linked to greater happiness.
Purpose.
People who capture grateful thoughts before bed sleep better than those who don't. Why so many positive changes? Because gratitude actually rewires our brains, kickstarting the production of dopamine and serotonin. Like antidepressants, these feel-good neurotransmitters activate the bliss center of the brain, creating feelings of happiness and contentment. This appears to be self-perpetuating. Research suggests that with regular practice, you'll train your prefrontal cortex to better appreciate and retain positive experiences and thoughts, and to deflect the negative ones.
Number 4, social media reduction. When it comes to using social media,
I just had a feeling this one was coming.
Moderation. There's research that says that a small amount of social media is beneficial, but a large amount is detrimental. 30 minutes of use a day is the advice from Dr. Jeremy Noble. He cited a University of Pennsylvania study. Cutting back on social media can significantly improve your well-being. Dr. Noble also advises to choose social media platforms that help us develop authentic social connections. Number 5, giving to others. Giving to others shows us that we have something to offer to the world. Ironically, this can help us feel less lonely. Local community volunteering, or just helping a work colleague or neighbour in small ways. According to Vivek Murphy, the man who first declared the loneliness pandemic back in 2017, quote, "Service is one of the most under-recognized antidotes to loneliness. It reaffirms to ourselves that we have value to add to the world." And lastly, number 6, connection. Loneliness is a stress state that makes us focus on ourselves rather than outwards towards others. To keep safe, we often treat people and things with suspicion when we feel lonely. This can ruin self-esteem. We feel like we're not lovable or likable. These factors compound on each other, making it hard to solve and creating a downward spiral. To break the cycle, one can start slowly. Even a quick hello to your neighbours can help inch connection forward. And lastly, if you are fortunate to have a healthy group of friends.
So before we move forward, I think giving to others is also something to be done in lieu of self-work. I'm very interested why, I guess maybe self-work is too broad of a topic, because isolating that down to its core is a little bit of a rabbit hole. But if you know how to navigate it, you could probably explain it pretty well. But when it comes down to giving to others, this is something that I've noticed, is people often enact simple concepts of charity to get away from the self-work needed. You didn't really change yourself by doing such. I think that giving to others needs to be in lieu of self-work and becoming better, because giving to others should only be a priority when you have your house in order. And that's not to say that that means that you can't interact with the world at all until that is accomplished. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that get your mind right, get your house, get your home right, get your immediate space right. Get it going on its own process, get it going on its own journey. The how doesn't matter, but allow yourself momentum to show that you are going in the right direction, because then by establishing a sense of mastery for yourself, can you confidently assist others in the same path and then move on outside of your immediate space into community, into giving to others, into forms of variations of charity where you can assist others. I think that is very important, and I think that it needs to be in that order. I don't think that if you're a destroyed human being, and not necessarily like you're hopeless, but although it can feel helpless, that you should immediately hop to giving to others because this makes you feel better. It's just like you need to make yourself feel better. You need to enact forms of charity for yourself. You need to save yourself. then once you understand what that looks like, what that feels like, I guarantee you're going to have confidence in your ability to guide others out of it. And I think that's the evolution of our development is how well a person that has mastered themselves integrates themselves into their community. And I think that's how you uplift people. It's not by giving money. It's not by giving things. I think it's by uplifting people.
Try and schedule calls together, talk to each other, and just chat about life. There's an old Japanese tradition from Okinawa called moe. It basically means lifelong group of friends. They meet weekly and talk about life, discuss issues, and help each other. Elders in Okinawa live extraordinarily better and longer lives than almost anyone anywhere else in the world. It's common to find moe groups that have been friends for over 90 years.
That's why I've travelled to the Japanese archipelago of Okinawa, where there are more centenarians than anywhere else in the world.
それからお友達関係とっても親しくして仲良くしてるから悩みあんまりない。
元気だろう、元気。友達と会うのが楽しみ。散歩行ってからよ。友達いるデイサービス。いっぱいいるさ、友達。おばあさんたちがいっぱいいる。カモの話さえ。何年も話する。
Grandma's got to talk about food.
私まだ病院の薬が一番楽しいのはみんなと一緒に会ってお話ししてそれからもう踊りを踊ったりしたら自分の健康になるような気がしますね一番。
Getting it.
3つぐらい空いてますよ。一番古いのだったらもう50年ぐらい続いてないからお友達が集まってごやごや話し合いするのがとっても楽しみ。もうやめないですよ。みんながね元気じゃないと自分もね長いこと元気でも面白くないさね。
I don't try to live as long as possible. It happens naturally because we all gather, laugh and cry together. And that's what's good. That's what we say.
That's it. That's really the way of life in Okinawa.
It's a bit anecdotal that I will say. I feel like the more that the younger generation in Japan kind of continues, I feel like not to sound doom and gloom, this may fade away, but I think that what typically stands the test of time is strong variations of culture that aren't cowardly and aren't selfish. And I think that this is maybe one of those examples because it's rooted in something so historical. It's been happening for decades, right? Generation upon generation, but that sheds, right? That sheds in families as much as it did in American society. It sheds the same. It eventually becomes weaker and weaker because we as people became less and less valuable. Now that's one of the tough parts, right? And hopefully I don't anger too many people, but it's just a genuine concept. It is an honest truth about what's going on in the world. And I feel like that's happening everywhere on a global scale, as they stated. And I think that has a lot to do with it. But it's hard to incorporate something that has withstood the test of time in other countries and then try to bring it over to you. That's not how it works, man. You may have something good going at first, but we need to address a different problem, probably in addition to trying to incorporate these things with it. I don't think one thing is ever enough.
Keep in mind that these are general rules, and some may find it harder to make connections than others due to being non-neurotypical or due to other circumstances within their lives. Sometimes, people that you try to connect with can just be plain rude. But at the end of the day, there are many ways to combat loneliness, so the key is to realize how you're feeling and to find the best strategy for you alongside professional help. If you encounter someone showing symptoms of loneliness, don't ignore them. Reach out to people who might be lonely. Talk to them. If they need professional help, guide them in the right direction. It all comes down to how can you be of service to others? The gift of simply being there and truly listening can sometimes go a long way. Go in with an open mind, don't be quick to judge, and try and practice understanding. Once we listen to others, they can be more open to listening to us. Chronic loneliness is an unnatural condition, a state that we were not designed for. It leaves us empty and longing for connection and understanding. It's been slowly building since industrialization, accelerating in the 1960s and 70s, before exploding in the 21st century. It crept in and snuck up on us, and only with the proliferation of smartphones and COVID did it get so severe that it could no longer be ignored. Only now are we starting to see and do we care about the impact of loneliness. Before it gets out of hand, we need to tackle the situation. Of course, you can't alleviate everyone's loneliness, as each person longs for different types and different depths of connection.
Subjective.
But as it poses a public health concern on a global level, both government sectors and private health organizations need to be more vigilant. Confronting loneliness is not an impossible task, but it is going to take some work. It requires a genuine demonstration of care and compassion for oneself and others. As mentioned, this episode was many months in the making, so I hope that I could shed some light on the modern origins of loneliness, the causes and the solutions. Although the chatter amongst strangers may have gone in many public spaces, hopefully the chatter on our streets will return one day. So what are your thoughts on this epidemic level of loneliness? Have you personally been affected by it? What's your story? Do you know someone else that's going through loneliness? Please share your experiences and insights in the comments section below. Anyway, that's about it from me. My name is Dagogo. If you did like this episode and want to see more on anything else on science, technology, and business, feel free to subscribe to ColdFusion. It's free. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again soon for the next episode. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
So that was the video by ColdFusion. First off, I think that his variation of editing is incredible. I think that they do a really good job at shifting talking points, and I think that I'm probably going to take some notes regarding some of my content, because I know that that's where I'm rough around the edges. I'm damn near awful at it, to be honest. But that plays a huge part. I think to address the content of the video, there is a problem. However, we do a poor job at talking about the causes in a genuine sense because it's too judgmental, and it's too intimidating, it's too harsh, and we don't ever want to think that it's that black and white because it allows us to elude from the purpose of the problem, not the purpose of the problem. It allows us to elude our own sense of blame. And the one thing that I noticed is the longer we go failing to take accountability, the longer we devoid ourselves of our own contribution to the problem. I think loneliness is an issue. I think that the way we've learned to cope with it has become more and more destructive. I think that a lot of these problems start on the individual level, even though that's been we're the most individualistic. I don't think that's true. If anyone wants to argue that, hit me in the comments. I don't think we are individualistic. I think we've become more impressionable, more sheep-like with every turning decade. I think that our values as a society have decreased on a large scale, where we've allowed more and more room for embitterment. I think that the less characterological development that we have as children is doing destructive wonders to us as people. And the more we encourage the neglect in our lives, I feel like the more we're just going to pretend like we're blind to things. I think ignorance is bliss. And I think that that's a statement for a reason. We can't be ignorant here. If we wake up and go to sleep with our own soul. That's my perspective. And I think the least that we can do is address that. I think that a lot of the content on the internet, and often in physical sense, is very shallow. Because the one thing that we're failing to understand is how subjective some of the stuff is. It is very specific from person to person basis. What one person's words may not be another. I think we need to break it down a little more. And I think we need to understand that the reason why we've allowed this form of living to continue is because we think so little of ourselves that we've accepted this as our reality. And there's nothing more destructive than telling yourself that you can't be nothing or that you don't have the ability to believe in you. And so what do? We scapegoat around that idea into immediate gratifications that we justify our existence through. Like, well, I had this good day at work. I had this. It's just like, yeah. Got it. You had this good thing happen that was outside of your work for you. What are you doing for you? And I think that either that's going to be, it's going to be received in two ways. It's going to be in the sense of, damn, I didn't think about it that way, or I don't know the answer to that. And it's like, good. Start thinking about that. Or the other side of it is just like, well, everyone's got to choose their successes from something. And it's like, yeah, but it's that way of thinking that led to this in the first place. And that's in a sense of the bare minimum. Why are we accepting the bare minimum? Well, at least it's this. It's just like, well, that's the problem right there. That's the problem right there. The fact that we have to start our sentence with at least. No. Why are we starting our sentences that way? Why are we okay with nothing? At least it's not. No, fuck that. Why isn't it this? Why? What are we doing to start this process? What aren't we doing? Like, what? We need to address the critical questions of ourselves. And I think that would do us so much more justice than the comparison dialogue. We don't need to compare ourselves to nobody until we've established something in ourselves to know where we stand in society. And we need to dictate our own value in regards to what would benefit us the most. That's not a selfish concept. That's an improvement concept where the greater we become, the world will know. The world will know how long we travel that dimension, because the world's going to treat us different. Well, if we're a man and we're complete shut-in with no courage, no confidence, and we have no success, we know how the world treats us. We've watched several documentaries covering what happens to men when this is the outcome. And so we start changing those components. We start addressing our neglect. We start to get our house in order. We establish our development along longer dimensions. We start to have less excuses. We start to work out more. We establish plans for our ambitions. We start pursuing success. In that path alone, do we establish more courage and more confidence and more success, financial contentment for ourselves. We are increasing our value tenfold, and I guarantee you the world will start treating us differently. The world will react, but thinking that the world is going to come to us, we're just holding our breath. And I don't want to see anybody holding their breath. I want to see people making differences in how the world treats them. And you determine your own, you determine what that progress looks like and how far along that process you go. And I think that plays a huge part in tackling such a individual issue as loneliness. And I think that it all starts with us. We can go back to the autonomy of traditional families. Is that a problem? Yes, we need fathers, but better yet, we need better men. We need better men to lead their households. We need better men to know that they should become better. We need to understand that we've been pursuing the shallow. Let's stop. Let's reorient our values. Let's change our perspectives. Let's change our narratives. Let's try something new. Let's walk the unknown, because walking the known has not helped us. And I think that the last thing that we should do is create an environment of insanity where we do the same thing over and over again, and then we're disappointed with the outcome because we thought it was going to be different. That ain't the move. Let's address it. Let's try new things. Let's embrace our failures. It's okay. We'll fail. Yeah. So what? We'll fail again. And then we're eventually going to find out what works and what doesn't. If you are afraid of failure, then you're also afraid of success. And you're also afraid and intimidated by the person you could be. Stop it. Let's become better. Let's do more. Let's fail so we can succeed. Thanks again for everyone watching the video. Please comment, like, and subscribe. And if you dislike the video, then dislike it and never see me again. But also comment in the comment section down below for any of your thoughts, any of your perspectives. I said a lot. If you want to argue with me, disagree with me, debate with me, by all means. It's just my passionate thoughts going forward. I do believe in human potential. That is definitely one of my perspectives and one of my beliefs. And I try to do it in everything that I do, and not only just through a damn electronic screen, but in my own personal life as well. It was a great video put forth. I think that a lot of points were tackled, and I think that there's always more that we can do. So thanks again, and I'll go ahead. See you next time.